Mel is now one of the worst champs in the game after her adjustments from this patch. Darius is looking like a stronger jungler than a top laner, while Cho'Gath mid is suddenly one of the most OP champions. So we have all this and much more to cover as we bring you guys an update to the solo queue tier list, along with all the new meta trends for every single role. And do you remember when knowing how to set up a freeze in low elo made you special? These days, you're considered a troll if you don't know what a freeze is. Problem is, challengers are so out of touch with the fact that everyone in low elo is improved, so if you ask for help, you just keep getting the same outdated advice. Or even worse, they give you tips that only work in high elo, like how you should sync up your wave crashes with your teammates in multiple lanes to set up invades or objective priority. The theoretically correct play is usually not what actually works in your own elo. Oftentimes, it's something that may seem out of the ordinary, like split pushing as an ADC that will give you way more agency. We teach you the correct way to play League like everyone else does, but also the adaptations that actually work in your elo, so you'll always have multiple great ideas for what to do to win games. We're constantly producing and updating our strategies with players getting better, so SkillCapped is by far the best platform for learning League of Legends. We're so confident that if you don't climb 5 divisions while actively using SkillCapped, you can claim a full refund. Our service has zero risk, with the potential to save you tons of time in your climb, so make sure to give us a try. One top lane champ who's going to be moving up the tier list is Gangplank. Gangplank actually got buffed in 2 different ways for this patch, as his AD per level was increased, while the cost reduction on Infinity Edge also benefits him. The changes have not turned Gangplank into a top tier pick, but they have proven to be enough to warrant a push out of the top lane B tier, as we're moving Gangplank into A for mid patch. With the tank item nerfs going through for this patch, one champ in specific who has really taken a hefty blow from them is Dr. Mundo. The reason Mundo has been hit harder than most tanks is because he builds 2 of the items that were nerfed, while most other tanks only build 1. Mundo also wasn't compensated with any sort of buff, as Riot ended up giving Sion a buff since he was going to be affected by these item nerfs, but they did not throw anything Mundo's way. Unending Despair and Heartsteel are core items on Mundo, and both were nerfed, while steel caps were even nerfed as well, so he's lost a bunch of power as a result. So Mundo is one of the weaker solo queue champs now, and is placed in the top lane B tier. For the top lane tier list, we have a few additional adjustments to cover for mid patch. With the tank item nerfs coming through, a few of them are looking quite weak now. Tahm Kench, Mundo, Maokai, and Sion are all underperforming due to the item changes, and you'll find them placed down in the top lane B tier. Warwick is going to be moving back up into the top lane OP tier, as the nerf he received this patch turned out to be pretty negligible. Warwick win rate only dropped by around 0.5%, which is not nearly enough to remove him from a top tier standing. Karma is being moved up into the top lane S tier, as she's a very strong pick right now for 3 different roles.
Top lane Karma can run Comet or Grasp for her keystone, but Grasp is what's performing best, and then you also take
Axiom Arcanist. Karma is very oppressive in lane and scales extremely well too, so there's just not a lot of downside to Karma right now. Axiom Arcanist is a big reason to why Karma is so good right now, as the rune has incredible synergy with her kit. Even though you are taking Grasp for the keystone, it's not a tank build that works best right now, as you want to be running Malignance with Archangels and Cosmic Drive. We've been keeping an eye on Darius jungle over these past couple of patches, as he's been slowly gaining in popularity, and we're finally going to be adding him to the tier list for 25.4. It's this very unique setup that is making Darius quite strong as a jungler right now, as it's a heavy movement speed focused build. After all, the main weakness of Darius is the fact that he lacks a gap closer, and without Ghost up, he has a harder time sticking onto his targets. Well, with this build, you almost completely take away that weakness, as it's Ghost Blade for the rush item, which provides the active movement speed. You also run Phase Rush for the keystone rune, and then you will be building Swiftness boots as well. Second and third items on Darius jungle are more up in the air right now, as Deadman's, Trinity Force, Sundered Sky, and Sterix are all viable options. So if you're looking for a new jungle pick to spice up your champion pool, then Darius is definitely one of the best options right now, as we are adding him to the jungle S tier, and we could even be looking to bump him into OP eventually if he catches on more in the coming patches. So if we have a look at the jungle tier list for mid patch, now that Diana has been nerfed and is no longer an OP tier jungler, we're going to be giving Nocturne a bump up to take her spot. It's not just Darius jungle as the only off-meta jungle pick that has been on the rise recently, as Yorick is another who's been gaining in popularity. With Yorick jungle, you have a really unique clear, because you're able to let your ghouls take down a camp by themselves without you even being there. Yorick's an especially strong low elo jungle pick, because it's a champ who just wants to full clear and hit 6 as soon as possible, so there's less variance around what you should be doing on the pick. When you hit level 6, you can skirmish very well and take down objectives super easily, so the only bigger downside to Yorick jungle is that his early ganks are not the greatest. So Yorick is also going to be added to the jungle S tier for this patch, joining Darius as one of the more underrated strong junglers. So suddenly, one of the most broken mid laners in the game who's been catching on quite a bit in the higher elos recently is Cho'Gath. It's an extremely unique setup that is giving Cho'Gath a ton of strength right now. It's actually really similar in theme to the Darius jungle build that is providing him with a lot of power, as this Cho build is also all about stacking a bunch of movement speed. You're your first two purchases are Synchronized Souls and Shuralias. What you're looking to do when you complete these two items is just perma-shove out waves and play for roam opportunities. It's a Q max that you're going with on Cho mid, so you can clear out waves very fast. After building Shuralias, it doesn't stop there in terms of movement speed, as you pick up Dead Man's second. You can also take Ghost instead of Teleport for your secondary summoner spell to amp movement speed even further. So overall, it's just a very easy to execute yet powerful setup for Cho'Gath right now, as the movement speed allows him to close the gap on enemies super easily and just one-shot squishies with one rotation of spells. For the rune setup, you're going Hail of Blades so that you can instantly proc all the damage from Cho's 3 E charges. So even though Cho mid is not super popular just yet, we do think this setup has turned him into an OP pick, so we're moving him into the OP tier for mid patch. With Yasuo receiving that buff to his passive for this patch, there's some really interesting things going on with his builds for 25.4. When Yasuo crits, he now crits for the full value instead of 90%, so it's made going for a 2-item crit core more valuable now. What we're seeing on the analytical side of things for this patch is that Phantom Dancer as a rush is now winning way more than last patch. It's set at a 48.5% win rate in 25.3 and is now all the way up at 51.5% for 25.4. That's a really significant spike in win rate, and it's actually overtaken Blade of the Ruined King in terms of win rate for 25.4. It's still early in the patch, so we'll have to see how this shapes out moving forward, but if you are a Yasuo player, trying out the PD rush is something to look into. The complete core build will consist of a Phantom Dancer rush into Infinity Edge second and Bloodthirster third. So if we have a look at the mid lane tier list, the OP tier is going to be locked down by Ahri, Syndra, and Cho'Gath. We noted during the intro, the Mel changes have turned out pretty much how we expected going into the patch. In the pre-patch tier list, we mentioned how we didn't think the Mel adjustments would boost her power, and that's held true, as Mel ended up losing 2.5% win rate due to the changes. Mel's now in a pretty terrible spot for solo queue, so we're pushing her further down the mid lane tier list, dropping her to C. During the pre-patch tier list, we also mentioned how Diana mid would be one to watch for 25.4, and with a few days of data now out, she's gained even more win rate than we expected, going from 50% last patch up to around 52% now. So definitely a really good mid lane pickup thanks to the buffs, and Diana finds a spot in the mid lane S tier. So heading down to the bot lane for the first time this season, we'll be moving Aphelios out of the C tier. Past couple of patches have brought forth some nice indirect buffs to Aphelios, as he's benefited from the Yuntal and Infinity Edge buffs, especially with Callista getting nerfed for this patch. Aphelios is definitely no longer on the same level as her, so he's getting moved up to B tier for mid patch. A second ADC who's going to be moving up one tier is Ashe. Ashe buffs seem pretty light, but they've actually tacked on about 2% win rate, which is a bit more than we were expecting. In this patch, we've also been seeing players gravitate a lot more towards Yuntal as their rush on Ashe instead of Kraken Slayer. The core build consists of Yuntal with either Hurricane or Phantom Dancer second and Infinity Edge third. One reason to why Yuntal has gained more relative power for this patch is due to the Ashe Q and W buffs both being AD ratio changes. Yuntal does offer up 10 more AD than Kraken Slayer, so you benefit a bit more from those buffs by building wild arrows. Overall, Ashe is back in a pretty good spot for solo queue after being one of the weakest champs for a couple of patches, as we're placing her in the ADC A tier. So for the ADC meta right now, this is the one role where we do have some very clear-cut standout champs. Jinx is most definitely one of them, as she's absolutely dominating the meta, holding one of the highest play rates and win rates for any ADC this patch. When both play rate and win rate are extremely high, it's pretty good indication of an OP champ, and that's where we're at with Jinx right now. The reason to why Jinx has really shot up past many other ADCs in power is due to both her core items getting buffed in recent patches. Yuntal Wild Arrows into Infinity Edge is such a powerful 2-item spike right now, and Jinx can abuse it super well. As for Vayne, she's right up there with Jinx for this patch as the 2 ADCs who are cut above everyone else. As we drop down to the S tier, there are many ADCs who are very strong and around the same power level, like Twitch, MF, Corki, and Sivir. Twitch was hit with that Axiom Arcanist nerf this patch, and so far it's looking like Domination Secondary has taken over as the more optimal secondary rune page. It's still early in the patch, so we can't say for sure, but Sudden Impact with Treasure Hunter is outperforming so far. There are really just 2 ADCs who are absolutely terrible at the moment, being Callista and Smolder. Callista is just always going to have a tough time breaking into the meta for solo queue because of the fact that even when she's average for solo queue, she tends to be very high priority in pro due to the champ being way more impactful in a controlled environment. So nothing really changed for the support meta in 25.4 as the champs who were strong last patch remain on top. Lulu was the one support who lost a decent amount of power, but as we expected, the nerfs were only enough to move her from OP into S tier, so there's really no reason to drop priority on Lulu. If anything, Karma priority does rise up a bit more for this patch due to the Lulu nerfs, as both of them are around the same power level now in the S tier. Last patch, Lulu was the clear-cut most OP support, but now in 25.4, we really don't have a single support who's a cut above everyone else. Thresh and Nami are the closest things to that, so they're taking up the OP tier slots, but they're really only slightly better than many of the S tier picks and definitely not miles ahead. Elise was another support adjusted for this patch, but the change changes have turned out completely neutral. So Elise remains in the S tier as one of the better pure carry supports. Definitely stay away from playing Mel support if you care about your LP, as the changes this patch have resulted in her win rate plummeting to 43%. It was somewhat respectable last patch at around 48%, but dropping down over 4% is a tough pill to swallow. Alright guys, one last thing, our rank up guarantee is insane. It's like signing up for the gym and getting a refund if you don't get ripped. That's how confident we are in SkillCapped. We obsess over making the best guides with top players, rigorous testing, and top tier video editing to make your climb easy. If you're ready to level up, visit SkillCapped.com and see the difference. So that's gonna wrap everything up for our 25.4 mid-patch tier list update. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.